I think we're ready to begin.
Awesome. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. And we'll call the General Academic Institution Formula Advisory Committee meeting to order. For the record, my name is Daniel Harper with the Texas State University System and serving as committee chair. For housekeeping, I've been asked to remind everybody to state your name before you speak, mute your device when not speaking, and keep your background noise to a minimum if possible. And with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Gonzalez for roll call.
All right, Ms. Albright.
Present.
Dr. Blanchard,
I'm here.
Ms. Brown,
Here.
Mr. Davidson,
I'm here.
Ms. Deerdorf,
I'm here.
Mr. Duran,
Here.
Ms. Crowell,
Here.
Mr. Harley. I think Lori Devaney's sitting in. Right?
Yes,
Or-
I'm here.
Great. Ms. Mendez,
Here.
Ms. Sloan,
Here.
and Mr. Tomlinson.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's see, next on the agenda, we have the approval of the minutes from our first meeting, which was August 25th. The included in the material should be the draft minutes, and ask everybody to, if they had any comments, questions, or concerns with the minutes as drafted. And hearing no comments, questions, or concerns, we'd ask for a motion and then a second.
This is Susan. I'll motion for approval.
I'll second. This is Veronica Mendez.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, hearing none, we have our minutes approved. So I guess agenda item 4, we'll discuss the various charges. For charge number 1, this is on the appropriate funding level, and then the split between utilities and M&O with respect to the infrastructure formula. I did request some data that the Coordinating Board produced on the split between M&O and utilities. And Jennifer, I don't know if you want to put it up on the screen or if we just want individuals to pull it up out of the materials that were the PDF materials that were provided. So, and I guess I'll from there kind of open it up for discussion of the full committee. All right. Well, hearing no volunteers.
Can you read that, the charge that we're looking at?
Yeah, so this one, I'm on page 7 of the materials that were provided. The first portion of that charge 1 that we have in our materials is to look at the infrastructure split between utilities and M&O. And one of the things that we had talked about previously that looks to be true is, going back to the 14-15 biennium, that split was effectively 50-50. And slowly over these years, it looks like the split has shifted significantly to the O&M side. I'm going to speculate based on some feedback I received from some others that, maybe the utility change for this last biennium was maybe somewhat COVID related. If utility costs across the institutions were going down. I know that the coordinating board is working with Tescubo on the utility survey, and so that may, have some benefits or maybe answer some questions on why that split continues to change. For people that are far more technical than I'm not sure if they have seen or have any kind of thoughts on, this continued shift from utility to O&M.
I can just say, this is Joseph Duran with Lincoln System, that looking just at, because of COVID, that we did see a reduction in our utility costs, but I think a lot of that was just simply due to that this past year and everything moving to online and remote learning. But there was a significant, decrease in our utility costs. But I think that is just an anomaly because we're back to normal operations today. So I'm thinking this year is going to be different or back to normal.
And I presume we'll have some kind of lag effect with it as in this, probably based on some kind of multi-year rolling average to it.
This is, in what years of data are going to go into the next biennium? Can you remind me?
That's someone far smarter than me to answer that question.
That's
Fiscal year 21 will be in the introduced bill, and then fiscal year 22 will replace that in the final version of the bill if they continue the standard methodology.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah.
Hey, Daniel,
Emily,
this is Lori DeVinny. While utilities went down, I think if you look at the O&M costs, they probably went up because that's when we were doing all the enhanced cleaning and disinfecting and all those other things that were unique during that FY20 year in particular. So while, I think it was both the utilities going down and O&M probably going up.
I would also add, Lori, it looks like one thing we've been trying to do is clean up the utility survey and the reporting. And so one thing we noticed is that some institutions were reporting 0 for their non-utility costs. And so that could have been accounting for some of those swings in the amount shown for the O&M cost in there. So that was included in the materials as kind of an update to that utility survey, with the hope that that reporting would maybe get better moving forward.
Well, then Emily, you haven't received much feedback from the Tescubo group on the utility survey, correct?
I'll let Jennifer come in on this.
Okay, sorry.
We brought it up at the July Tescubo meeting, and there wasn't too much feedback. Sarah Baker has helped to send it out to the different groups, and we still haven't gotten too much feedback, and we kind of are looking forward to these small adjustments we've made in the template to kind of provide some more directions and let them know the importance of it since it's used for formula funding. And hopefully we get some more attention put on it during this next go around.
Thanks, Jennifer. So is the group?
Sorry, was I on mute that whole time?
No, we heard you.
Oh, okay.
We heard you. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm glad that we spent the time to kind of look to understand why this kind of this movement to O&M has been occurring, and hopefully what Lori DeVinny said will show right, and this will go back more to that kind of that 50-50 split or 60-40 split that we had in the past. And yeah, and hopefully the more emphasis on the importance of the utility survey will help kind of improve the quality of the data going into it. Any other kind of thoughts or discussion on that portion of the charge?
Will there be a discussion of the appropriate funding level? Was that going to be like the opportunity to talk about?
That's next. So
Okay.
I'm just scrolling through the materials. So on PDF page 9, Veronica's when we kind of get to that section. Well, hearing no further comments, we can move on, and I guess we'll open the floor up to Veronica since she asked. So.
Well, no, I mean, I'm not part of that charge. I'm wondering what you all thoughts were on that discussions as it relates to the infrastructure, because we've had some discussion in terms of what the infrastructure costs have been in terms of IT infrastructure to support all of the new deliveries.
Yeah, Daniel, this is Noelle Sloan. One thing I noticed on the materials, and I think this was after the August publication, but the Common Fund, August 31st, released the Higher Education Price Index forecast for 2021. For the fiscal year 2021 is forecasted to rise to 2.7%. So that's just one thing that I was wondering if could be updated, and the anticipated inflation rate is currently listed at 2.3, but it appears HEPI is going to be coming in at 2.7.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, that was kind of on my note sheet as well, is to see if the collective group was interested in updating that HEPI number. I know I'm supportive of it. Kind of
I would support that. This is Susan. I would support updating it.
And Daniel, this is Joseph, and I'd also agree. I think we need to take another look at the inflation adjustment, whether it's looking at the HEPI or even the CPI, because just looking at the August 21 CPI, it's higher than what the projected CPI index is for 21, 22, and 23. So I think definitely, I think we need to take another look at that.
All right. And I guess we won't, because the HEPI thing right now is it's their forecast for the fiscal year, but I don't know if we'll have the actual by the time we need to write our report. So
this is Veronica. Maybe we could say that whichever one we will recommend, that whatever is set at actual is what the recommendation would be. And so I'd like for us to consider, maybe we need to do some research in terms of utility increases given the last high demand in the state. We all sort of talked about it. I know that the state has been accommodating and absorbing some of the increases there, but I'm wondering if electricity costs will be higher.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting to know how, kind of from a practical standpoint, using multiple different inflation factors would come into play. I think someone can correct me. I guess historically we've always used one inflation factor, I would assume, through formula advisory.
Correct.
So which one do we use? Is it the CPI or the ACPI?
We've been using CPI for several of the last biennium, but the very last one, we used the HEPI one.
I would support continuing with the HEPI one.
I agree.
I agree.
Well, the A&M system we've historically been using, we've gone back and forth, but over the last few years, we've used the HEPI as well.
And that's what we use internally at Texas State System. So any opposition from, at least for right now, using HEPI, the most recent forecasted HEPI number to calculate inflation?
You know, Daniel, this is Joseph. I don't have any opposition, but do we have to put in a number, or can we put in that a how and a when, you know, that we will be using the HEPI based on this date when it's available, or do we have to put in a number? Like,
my guess is for us to produce the actual charge, you know, the actual charge, we're going to need a dollar value to put in there. I will defer to the coordinating board on really truly what the latest point in time that we could make that final determination on, so they could physically produce our recommendation.
And this is Susan, could we put a number in there? Because I mean, the coordinating board is going to have a number to move forward with, but then also put in as part of our recommendation that it be updated, that sort of thing, so that we have a number, because the board is going to want to see a number.
I
like that. This is Joseph. The other thing, I think that 2.7 HEPI number is not as of August, but I think it's June 30th.
So I was saying that's when Common Fund sent out their latest newsletter report.
But I think it was as of June 30th. So they'll have another one that they put out that will be through August 30th. Pretty sure.
Yes.
On their website right now, they have one through August 20th, and they still have it at 2.7. So, all right. Well, unless there's opposition, we'll kind of move forward with what Miss Susan Brown suggested, which is the.
Daniel, this is Joseph. Can I just one thing on inflation? Is it coordinating boards or our job, whoever, to project what inflation is going to be for the 23-24 biennium or 24-25 biennium?
And that was a question that actually I had as well. Are we just taking the last biennium and applying one inflation factor to it, or are we trying to move that to get it as current as possible? And I think that's kind of this, maybe a similar thought you were having, unless I misunderstood it.
Correct.
And Jennifer, do you know how we've done it historically in the past when we try to apply inflation to the rate?
Yes, I don't have it open in front of me, but I believe it looks back 2 or 3 years, so that it's using like 5 years in the forecasted method. Then as the number as we get actuals in there to replace those numbers, we'll use those so that we're getting truer data in the projection.
As we all know, that this Joseph again, that looking at the monthly CPI index, I mean, it was at 1.4% in January, and now it's 5.25% in August. So we all know it's going to keep going up.
For sure. And I guess, Joseph, I think it'd probably be good, for a couple of us to just double check to make sure we understand, how the coordinating board is just mechanically applying inflation. I thought I had seen a spreadsheet.
Yes.
That had it, and of course.
It was in the original materials. I didn't throw it in this one, but I'll go ahead and email it out to everybody. And in there, you can actually see what the formula is doing. So.
Thank you, Jennifer.
So any kind of other thoughts or discussion on charge one? And this is a kind of a question for the collective group. In two, not last session, but the session before that, we put a lot of effort into trying to catch up the small institution supplement for inflation. And it doesn't look like we have an inflation factor. I'm on page 9 of the PDF for the small institution supplement. Is there kind of thought on either the approach of coming back every decade to try doing a large catch up on the small institution supplement versus maybe a more stepped approach of doing it every 2 years?
This is Emily. I think it would be helpful to treat the small institution supplement like you would the other formulas and just apply inflation, because I feel like relying on a large catch up every decade is probably going to be harder than incremental changes that are made across all the formulas if they decide to fund inflation for infrastructure and for the INO. That's my 2 cents.
This is Susan. I would agree with that. I think it would be probably an easier lift to do it that way.
Yeah. And any other thoughts? Any naysayers to that?
This is Joseph. I agree with the comment.
Thanks, Joseph. All right, well, we'll add it on as a recommendation as well for right now to apply that, let's say 2.7% to the small institution base as well.
I'll make those 2 updates on the projections and have it available for the next meeting.
So with that, I think that concludes our discussion on charge 1. And so charge 2 is next in line, and that's study and make recommendations on the inputs for the operation support and space support formula, including but not limited to the weights in the expenditure study, the tuition estimate methodologies, and the online adjustment in the space model. The charge 2 work group, I believe, met twice. And I will turn it over to Ms. Noelle Sloan to lead that discussion.
Thank you. This is Noelle Sloan. Our work group did meet twice. We broke this into 3 components. The first being a review of the weights in the expenditure study. The first thing that we requested is a data run. Right now, the expenditure study uses a 3-year average, and we requested, and the coordinating board provided a 5-year average just to see if that would make a difference. That is provided in the materials. As you can see, there was really no significant gain that we saw in using a 5-year average versus a 3-year average. So the work group did not make a recommendation to change the average of them. Beyond this, we really don't have any suggestions of what further adjustments may be needed. I think that all of us did recognize when there was a change in the instructions and more consistency in the way DOE was spread, that we did notice some improvements then, and hopefully when that cycles through for the full 3-year average, that would be effective as well. I'll pause there. I would welcome any other committee members' comments on that first piece of it.
This is Susan. When does that 3-year cycle come in? That will come in for this biennium, won't it?
Yes, it should.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else with the first piece of charge 2? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the second piece of it, was the tuition estimate methodologies. And I will go really quickly on this, is that we again requested data going back several biennia to look at the estimates used versus the actual tuition data. The coordinating board again provided that for us, and it is in the materials in attachment A. Quite honestly, the working group has not had enough time to really review that. That's going to be on our agenda for this coming up month, and to have more discussion with the full committee at our October meeting. But would appreciate, everybody kind of looking at that data and hearing your thoughts on it as well for the October meeting. And then the final piece was the online adjustments in the space model. The group did look at this and look at, some suggested options. But as a working group, the group really felt that the data we have with the past 2 years, fiscal year 2021 and this current year, looking at fall 21 and fall 2020 and fall 2021, data is both years an anomaly and really hard to suggest changes in a space model that is based on data from pandemic years, that makes it very difficult to anticipate what the impact of that would be, or where the institutions will be as far as their mix between face-to-face, hybrid, and online moving forward. So really don't feel comfortable making any changes or recommending any changes at this time. I think that the report that the Formula Advisory Committee submitted last biennium still holds true as far as the cost of online delivery is not less than the cost of face-to-face delivery. And probably there are everyone on this committee that could add to that based on their experiences through the pandemic of additional IT and flipped classrooms and modality changes that have increased expenditures in those areas for online delivery over the past year and a half. So at this time, the working group did not recommend any changes.
Awesome. All right. I guess any other kind of thoughts on charge 2 for the group? I personally, Noel, I didn't have the chance to listen along to your work groups, but I, agree kind of with where y'all ended up from my perspective on both of those.
So Daniel, this is Joseph. I'm kind of in agreement just right now, thinking on comments made on 1 and 3, and then 2, I think, is one that, we could dig a little deeper into. And, if we just went to actuals, I think it'd make the LBB's job a little easier. But anyway, my other thought is if the formula was just a GR allocation formula, and then we added tuition on top of that. But I know there would be some impacts that I don't know what that would be to each of the schools. But anyway, I'm in agreement with what was said.
I will agree with Joseph that I do like the idea of looking into that tuition a little bit more, because it does play, I think, maybe a larger emphasis than it was intended to play that way, and differentiated emphasis for each institution so I would agree with looking into that a little bit more. So, but all the others, I'm absolutely fine with those.
All right. Well, I think that concludes kind of our discussion on charge 2 with some more follow-up. And next is charge 3, which is study and make recommendations on the appropriate funding for the Texas Research University Fund, the Texas Comprehensive Research Fund, and the Core Research Fund. We did request some data from the coordinating board. It is on the PDF page 11 is where it starts in the materials. And Jennifer may have also had a spreadsheet that she provided as well, but I think that's just the detail behind it and the summaries in the PDF materials. For those that really kind of aren't familiar with the kind of, I call it the rate issue, historically, these research funds, I mean, they are a formula in nature, but the legislature didn't really consider them to be a formula. And we've worked, and the legislature supported adding riders in the appropriations bill that kind of helped us understand what the rates were that they were funding in the current biennium, et cetera. I assume that, I would assume that our recommendation, or I would suggest a recommendation, would be to fund the growth in those 3 funds, plus using that HEPI inflation factor as well. And with that, I open it up to the collective group for discussion.
This is Susan, and I would definitely agree with funding growth plus inflation. I mean, that's kind of the recommendation on everything else. And I think that would provide some consistency across the board that way.
This is Joseph. Also, Daniel, what you said about, I think if we could treat it more like a formula item rather than a non-formula support item would be important as well, in addition to the growth and the inflation.
Yeah, which makes you wonder if going back in that, in the PDF packet that Jennifer sent on PDF page 9, if we wanted to, maybe if it's worth trying to portray it inside that summary or not, but we can, I think, kind of hash through that as this develops along. But I think it'd be good to try, at the same time we have instruction, at the same time we have infrastructure, having for the general academics that research piece be part of that same discussion.
This is Emily. I agree. I think we should treat it similar to how the HRIs have their research formula tied up as part of the formula discussion. I think the more we can try to make that happen for our research funds, the better, so they don't get lost in the discussion.
This is Noelle Sloan. I agree.
Any other discussion on charge 3? Hearing none, we're on to charge 4, which is study and make recommendations on the funding methodology for the comprehensive regional universities under Senate Bill 1295. The study must review the methodology, or allocation of the funds and promotion of student success. I did listen in on, participate in that work group, which we met last week, and I'll turn it over to Joseph Duran to lead the discussion on it.
This is Joseph. Thanks, Daniel. So we did meet. We met once last week on Wednesday, September the 15th from 3 to 4 p.m. via WebEx. And I believe we had everybody on the call. It was Dr. Blanchard, Ms. Susan Brown, Daniel Harper, and Dr. Hurley were on there, and myself. And so we started off really by looking at our charge, and there was two things that we needed to do. Was one is review the methodology, allocate the methodology allocation, and then promotion of student success. So basically, I think, and committee members, if y'all disagree, let me know. But after our discussion, I believe we were all in agreement with, the verbiage that was laid out and the recommendation and methodology laid out by Senate Bill 1295, which number one, the methodology was such that allocated some base funding to each of these 27 schools of $250,000 a year, $250,000 a year, and then $1,000 based on some outcomes funding, and that outcomes was number of at-risk degrees that were awarded. And so I believe the consensus there was that we were okay with that methodology. Similar to our other discussion on charge number 3, we felt that number one, this should be treated like a formula allocation versus just a simply non-formula support, and that the appropriations should be allocated directly to the institutions in their appropriation bill. As far as student success goes, we did talk about, the ultimate goal of this initiative is really to provide, as we discussed, an add-on or enhancement to what folks are already doing with regard to our at-risk kids. And that is, how can we enhance, getting them in the pipeline, keeping them there, and getting them out with the degree. And so we talked about different ways of how we could do that, how these funds could be utilized. But ultimately, this is a support that supports it's performance-based funding, and it does, I think, could add some value to what our schools are doing. So with that, I'll stop.
Joseph, did we talk also about kind of considering this to be maybe like a fourth element of the overall formula?
Well, we did talk, I don't know about a fourth element, but we talked about treating this as a formula allocation rather than just some non-formula special item support,
Yeah.
That was, we did mention that, and I think we were all in agreement with that.
Right.
Daniel, do you want to talk about, you had mentioned
My dream that you're going to kill?
Yeah.
No, I'll hassle you guys about it if our work group meets again. So
okay.
You guys don't ever want to believe in a dream, though.
It's our job is to kill dreams. But Daniel, didn't you know that?
I forgot. That's the problem. All right. Any kind of other discussion on charge 4? Well, hearing none, we move to charge 5, which is the study and discuss considerations for adjusting formula funding to reflect the cost of education related to student characteristics, enrollment changes during the biennium, and any other relevant factors. I guess I've not put a lot of kind of effort into that as of today. But the one thing I did ask, the coordinating board in our original materials provided us head count data. that showed headcount change. And I asked them, since the formula was based on weighted semester credit hours, if there was a way that we could see what the base period was on a weighted semester credit hour versus what the actual fiscal year weighted semester credit hours were. And I think they're working on that request for maybe our next meeting, understanding that the expenditure matrix or the expenditure study won't change. So there's still some, won't be an absolute, but it'll be kind of close.
Daniel, this is Joseph. Can you say that again? Kind of.
So so the materials were based on head count, right? They kind of just showed you the change in the head count over these. So I asked them if we could look at what the weighted semester credit hour actually changed versus, comparing the base period versus year one of the biennium versus year two of the biennium. Kind of what I read this charge to kind of align to is, should higher ed look at a funding model more similar to public ed's foundation school program, which has a settle up at the end of the academic year. So to do that, I figure we probably really need to see what weighted semester credit hour changes are to see if there's a problem we're trying to solve for or not.
So like you would look back at fiscal year 21 and 22, those fiscal years weighted hours as compared to the base period that was used for that biennium.
Correct. Yeah. So, and it's, when I looked at the head count data, I didn't see a global trend that showed one way or another. There's some institutions that doesn't really appear that their weighted semester credit hours change significantly year over year. You have some institutions where it seems like their enrollment fluctuates up and down more significantly. And then obviously, we have growing institutions where you would expect, their base period potentially be the lowest of those 2 years. So
I think I said 21, 22, but it would be year one would be 20, year two would be fiscal year 21 compared to the base period. For that matter.
So I didn't know, if the group had kind of any other thoughts they wanted to talk about for this meeting on the enrollment change during the biennium, or if the collective group was okay with waiting for that data request to come or subsequent data request and having a discussion about it at our October meeting. And hearing none, I'm assuming we're good with, the October meeting to continue that discussion. And the next part of that charge was student characteristics. And I've kind of equated that to, at-risk students, I think. But I'm not sure if there is a better way to describe that, what student characteristics we'd be looking for data that we currently capture. And kind of open it up to the group to talk about student characteristics.
I guess, this is Joseph, I'm thinking that, within the expenses that are reported in our expenditure study include all the costs, right? So to me, the cost to educate any and all our students, including at risk, is funded via that cost matrix. And the legislature ultimately determines the amount of money that goes through there. But to me, that's where the formula, the I&O formula is there to provide those dollars along with the tuition and fees that you charge to teach our kids. I see that a little different than when we look at our charge 4, is it charge? Yeah, charge 4, where to me, that's not a proposal to help offset the cost of educating these kids. It's really more of an initiative or a student success initiative in order to be an add-on or enhancement to better do what you're already doing and to get these kids out. But it's not meant to be an offset, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can follow that. Yeah, so the cost data is embedded in there. Then of course it's averaged and it's provided equally, if you will, across all institutions. And I guess you could have an institution that would have, a larger role in educating at-risk students, but then, as you said, kind of factored in for in the Senate Bill 1295 proposal.
And remind me, I should know this, but what is developmental ed fund? What's the weight? Is it a 1 or is it?
It's a 1.
It's a 1.
This is Emily. I guess the only thing we might consider is if we wanted to think about a way to create a lever that would focus on those student characteristics rather than having them all averaged up in the cost study, because I think you're exactly right that it's captured in the expenditure study, which then filters through the INO. But whether or not it's worth it to think of additional focus on top of that for things like at risk or if there are better factors, or if the INO is sufficient, if it were fully funded.
Could we think of it in terms of, like, right now we have the 10% for the teaching supplement, maybe add it as and I don't know what any of the numbers would actually come out to be, but to do something along those lines, if we want to do something to make it almost a supplement.
Yeah, because as we've talked about, with that 1295 proposal, that excludes the research universities and emerging research universities that, do play a role in, educating the state of Texas. So I wonder if we could look at something similar to that teaching experience supplement, a 10%, I make it up because that's what the teaching experience supplement is, a 10% weight for at-risk semester credit hours, but
that's the coordinating board probably needs to weigh in here, because that's gonna add a whole lot of complicating factors to the SCH, because you'd have to know which students provide which SCH at what weight, and it's gonna, there are some complicating factors that go into that. I understand, so don't take it as you need to go run and do all this work, but I was just trying to think of how that could play out.
Right, because the SCH that are in there are based on the 4, which is course-based data. We don't necessarily have a way to identify those by whether that's an at-risk student or not. So we don't have a great data to match up at-risk students to the courses that they're taking.
But starting in the spring, the 4 is going away you're going to have a beginning of semester S that would give you individual courses for students. I don't think it's something for this biennium, but I do think it's something that we might look at, because you won't have that data until further down the road, because you're going to start collecting it in spring. So I'm thinking.
I'm sorry.
No, I was saying that would be something. I think that might be almost a charge for the next for the next biennium to work, so that you would actually have some of that data, a better handle on some of that data.
And this is Noelle. help me understand for this purpose how we would be recommending defining at-risk students?
It's currently defined as Pell and low ACT, SAT.
So that's the other nuance is I know at our institution, I think at other institutions that have gone test optional, how you now capture correctly those students that are, you know, needing that extra support for student success and at risk.
Noel, this is Joseph. I did talk to our academic affairs vice chancellor about that, because the same thing we have here, where those tests are going away in some cases. But one thing that's not is the Pell Grant. And so right now, just thinking about charge 4, that the criteria for being at risk is Pell Grant and the other one. But I imagine over time, it's going to be Pell Grant eligible or not. It's going to be the main one unless we change things.
Yeah, I just think we're losing a large cohort there of, you know, students that we are serving, right, that are at risk but are not Pell eligible.
But they would have, your thought is, but they would have fit the other parameter of scoring below the average on the SAT or ACT.
Yes.
Well, I think this is something new that folks are moving towards, and not, so we knew back then when this was being drafted that it was going to be, we were moving in that direction necessarily.
Yeah, I don't have the answer. I just think that it's something, again, that we maybe need to think about what is that right metric.
I could not agree with you more, Noel. This is Lauren Blanchard. I've been wondering about the ACT, SAT piece as well. And I'm trying to understand, certainly based on what you have already described, that so many of our campuses are not going to be making decisions on using SAT or ACT, given that many of them are test optional. I do think that it is going to be important, though, to have something on that academic side and not just concentrate on the financial assistance that's needed in order to make the determination. And maybe that's something we can go back and really have a good conversation about, to make a determination of what could be some recommendations we could make.
I agree, but I will add to this that class rank is also going away for a lot of schools. So let's not go in that direction, because that seems to be going away also. I don't know what's coming in place, but we don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
So what would you think is the main reason a student is at-risk student? Is it finances? Would probably, I would think, be on the top of the list.
I think it's finances, and what we're seeing from the pandemic is kind of an increase in underprepared academically. And I don't know if it's because, I mean, with the pandemic, there's not just the academic preparation, but it's also the mental aspect and the online, and there's just been a lot of stuff that has happened this past year. So it's kind of hard to get a handle on it, but there is some academic. We have some that are not Pell, but they really struggle in college. So I don't know.
Susan, you're right. I agree again that it definitely is academic preparation. If we're looking at risk factors, it's certainly going to be financial capability, and it's going to be race, ethnicity. Those are the primary factors when given consideration about not only at-risk groups, but if we are also looking at the equity piece as well.
Yeah, and I will say, since we're over 90% Hispanic, it's really hard for me to look at the ethnicity piece because our white students don't do as well as our Hispanics in a lot of places. So I think it's more a matter of trying to get them to fit in.
And this is Noelle. I need to have more conversations on, with academic side on our campus to be able to suggest maybe some other metrics or things like that. But I don't know how it would interplay. But the Texas Success Initiative, the TSI tests as one base level of academic preparedness. Something maybe to explore further. And I just need to have more conversations so that I can understand that better too.
So just thinking mechanically, though, we have the Senate bill was passed, it's in the statute, and we're talking about 24, 25. I mean, there's nothing to do until the next biennium, right?
Yeah, I thought the conversation was detached from Senate Bill 1295. This is more, really getting back to what is that student characteristic that reflects, quote unquote, at risk. So.
Well, then, I go back to the fact that whatever it costs to teach all the kids from A to Z is in the cost study.
Yep.
And the only way that we can allocate more money is if the legislature appropriates more money, because we all know that the formula is not really, doesn't tell you how much money you need. It just tells you how you allocate each dollar. And the legislature determines how many dollars are allocated. So I think when you look at, what does it cost to educate our kids of whatever characteristic they are, it's already reflected in those costs. Anyway, that's my thought.
And this is Noelle again. I don't disagree with that comment that the expenditure study covers the cost of educating our students, but I almost think of this metric of the at-risk students is what is that additional need, that additional cost that would help us retain the students we're losing. So it might not be in that expenditure study, except for the first year they were here, but is there more that could enhance those at-risk students so that the retention is higher and we get them to graduate?
Noelle, this is Joseph again. I would say then that we then go back to charge number 4. And my thought is that was the whole purpose of that initiative, that student success initiative, was to provide, an enhancement or an add-on support to provide additional advisors, better tutoring, career counseling, in addition to what you're already doing, but it would be an add-on on top of that for these. And if you look at those 27 schools, well, if you look at how they rank, whether it's in persistence, graduation rates, or retention, they're down at the bottom. And so that's what I'm thinking. Senate Bill 1295 was the purpose, was to provide not a supplement to offset the cost, but to provide an enhancement on top of what you're already doing. That's my thought.
But I agree. The counter to that is that is only to those institutions. And so there's other institutions that still are serving the at-risk students too that aren't covered under that charge 4.
And And I also thought that one of the other reasons for this was to do something specific to those 27, since I just kind of looked at the numbers this morning. There's 147 million that goes to 2 institutions. There's 14 million that goes to 24 institutions as part of the Comprehensive Research Fund. Then there's another 150 million that goes to 8 institutions as part of the emerging research universities and the core research support for those 8. So, I thought this was specific to target those 27. Not to say that the others aren't doing it as well, but those others also have additional resources going their way. Anyway, some more of my thoughts.
All right. Any other discussions on any of the charges we have? All right. Well, hearing none, so I guess next on the agenda is kind of just, so I guess we're going to meet Wednesday, October 27th at 10 a.m. And Jennifer, we need to kind of recap our discussions on charge 1 through 5, or do you think that it's kind of clear on what we're looking for our October 27th meeting?
I'm clear on charge 1. The only would be if y'all wanted any other action on charge 5.
On charge 5, and then all I have on my notes is we're gonna get that base period weighted semester credit hour information,
Right.
And then I don't know if the collective group wants to continue to talk about what the future definition of at risk may be, if that fits in with our charge. So
I would agree, but I think that's kind of almost a discussion item, because unless the coordinating board wants to do some research into what else is available, I don't know. But I kind of, Joseph is right in that it takes the expenditure study as it currently is, takes all of those costs into account already. Now it does average it out, but it's anything you do in the formulas is going to average out. That's,
This is Lori DeVinny. I think the discussion on at-risk is an important one to continue. We can continue capturing the Pell piece, but the services that any additional funding would provide aren't the financial aid or emergency loans. It's the academic support services that those students would need. And so we want to try and be sure that we're capturing those academically at-risk students somehow, if the future of the test scores is uncertain, where that won't be robust data anymore. So I think that's a really important discussion for this committee.
So given that discussion, can the coordinating board look at the overlap between students who did not successfully complete the TSI and those that are deemed below average in the ACT, SAT? Taking out that Pell element, but just those two, just do a comparison between those two. I haven't looked at that, so I can't even say what ours is, but I'm just saying that might be, some information that could be useful.
So I need to go back and see, but just to make sure I have it right, you're looking at people that did not do well on the TSI test,
right?
Or that had below average test scores, or where there was overlap there.
Yes, to see, if you had I don't know, 1,000 students that were below average on the ACT, SAT, and 1,000 students that were low. Yeah, they were the same students that were also low on the TSI. Were not TSI complete, shall we say, when entering. That way you have that kind of, is that a good substitute for the ACT, SAT? I don't know. So, but that might provide some information on where we could possibly head.
I'll find out what we have on the TSI complete data and see if we can do something on that.
Okay, it's on the 002.
Okay.
And I would,
Along those lines, would it be useful also to see how many students that are academically at risk aren't Pell eligible, so we kind of know what this group of students that we might be losing out on is? My guess is it's going to be sizable enough we want to address it, but if it's, 4% of those students, maybe we don't want to, it's not as big of an issue. So I think it's worth knowing kind of what the size of our problem is on this academically at-risk piece.
That's a good point.
So what does the data run on that? I'm sorry, what you said, look at.
Figuring out how many of the academically at-risk students are not counted under Pell eligible. So you're just identifying students that are only at risk because of academics, not those that are academic and Pell or just Pell.
Okay. And in this situation, you're defining academically at risk as the TSI one on the.
No,
on the
it's
two.
the low ACT, SAT,
Okay.
below average on it. It's the current definition.
just going to add in that we'll go back and see about all these data pools and see what that can tell us too. But the intention of this charge too was also to find out what are these questions that need to be answered and what are the areas for further research. So certainly the group can also consider looking at, what data isn't currently available or needs to be looked at. Susan, you mentioned that there will be new data collections in the spring. So that's an option as well. It was kind of intended to spark the conversation and make sure that those ideas and thoughts were kind of put out there and considered for future exploration as well.
All right. Well, sounds like we're going to conclude our meeting with more work. So, unless Jennifer needs anything more, next on the agenda is adjournment, and I open it up for questions. And if there's no questions, we need a motion and a second.
Daniel, this is Joseph. Can I say one more thing? So I'm going to look to schedule one of our charge force subcommittee meetings just before the October 27th meeting.
Perfect.
I think you had mentioned you might want to, and we can just have maybe it's only 30 minutes, but you'll be getting something from me.
Perfect.
Good.
All right.
With that, I'll move adjournment.
I'll second this, Joseph.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, we will adjourn until October 27th at 10 a.m. Thanks, everyone.